Good afternoon and welcome to the Northeast 2021 KDOT Local Consult meeting. We're coming to you virtually today, and we welcome and appreciate your participation. I would be the first to say that I really wish we could be in person for a host of reasons. The discussions are rich when we are in person. It's sort of easier to read the room, but it was really important for us to go ahead and get together, even though we couldn't do it in person, because we need to keep pace with the IKE program. We'll talk a bit more in a minute about putting projects into the development pipeline. And it's really because of your participation that we have IKE as our platform today. Your input helped to shape the development of IKE, the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, and it's what will propel us forward in the future. So with that, welcome to the virtual edition of Local Consult in 21, and let's take a moment and hear from Governor Kelly.
Hello, I'm Governor Laura Kelly. Thank you all for taking part in this critical effort to improve transportation in Kansas. 2 years ago, more than 2,000 Kansans participated in local consult discussions in communities large and small. Many of you were part of those discussions. In those meetings, you shared ideas to create more flexible approaches to infrastructure improvements. You challenged KDOT to become a better partner and solve more problems by eliminating harmful internal silos. We heard you loud and clear. Thanks to your time, your thoughtfulness, and collaborative spirit, today we have the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, more commonly known as IKE. I signed this landmark 10-year program into law last year after it passed through the legislature with strong bipartisan support. Through IKE, we more than doubled transportation investments from 2018 to fiscal year 22. That's over $1 billion more for projects, for Kansas highways and bridges, for broadband infrastructure, for aviation, public transit, and for biking and walking paths. These investments are making transportation safer. They're strengthening critical infrastructure, creating jobs, and delivering more economic opportunities for our state. My administration is committed to keeping up this momentum. Earlier this summer, we announced nearly $1 billion worth of highway projects moving to the construction pipeline. As promised, we'll deliver one phase of the remaining T-Works projects to construction by the end of this year. And, true to my word, we are on track to close the aptly named Bank of KDOT by fiscal year 23. We're making sure that transportation dollars are used for transportation projects. Again, thank you for participating in the local consult process. Your input shapes the next 8 years of the IKE program, and we'll make sure we deliver the quality transportation system Kansans need. Take care.
All right, thank you to Governor Kelly. And today, once again, we are putting the principles of IKE into practice. There are three fundamental principles. First, working in partnership with the transportation advocates that are on the phone today, with public officials, with business leaders, working together to solve problems. Sometimes we solve transportation problems kind of unto themselves, but sometimes a community faces a problem or a challenge, and transportation is a part of the solution. So we want to be at the table with you in all of those circumstances. And one of the best ways that we can solve problems together is by having more options. And you're going to hear today about some new projects and some new scopes, better information, again, more options so that we can do a better job of solving problems with you. So specifically, we're here today to replenish the IKE rolling program pipeline. We also want to prepare for possible Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is IIJA. The bill's being marked up on the House side in DC as we speak. In terms of that program, it is possible, depending on what the final language looks like for us, for KDOT, Kansas, to receive additional highway funds, additional bridge funds, and a host of other kinds of programs. Regardless of whether that program passes in this form or in another form, we are always in better shape if we're prepared and have projects on the docket ready to go. So today we want your input on highway expansion and modernization projects. We need to put between $600 and $750 million into the development pipeline statewide. So that's not just for Northeast Kansas, but for the entire state. I think it's important to pause on this slide and think about the implications of what this first local consult meeting under the Ike Rolling Program means. Under Ike, we have a much more dynamic process. That means we can bring new project scopes to you. We are not scoring necessarily all the projects. We may bring those back in 23 or 25. We want your input on that. We have better information now to share with you about scopes and costs. It's through this greater flexibility so that we can get to emerging needs or opportunities faster. What we also need to think about, though, is with that greater flexibility comes absolutely a responsibility for greater transparency. I encourage you to go to ksdot.ike, k.ike.org for more information about the Ike program. There is a host of information there. We've never been more transparent, and I encourage you to use that site to find out all things about Ike. Now, our meeting today is going to follow a typical local consult sort of agenda. We have some survey results to share with you. We have project lists, scores, and as I mentioned, updated information. You will be placed into a Zoom room automatically when it's time to go into discussions about projects. We'll then come back, have a bit of a break and talk about some new KDOT initiatives, and then we'll hear the report out from those Zoom room breaks. So let's start first with a little information about the survey results. I was thrilled with almost 2,000 responses to our statewide survey, with more than 350 responses coming from the Northeast District. Now, I think it's really interesting. That's one of the things I love about regionalism, is that we can really dive in and understand what's going on in each part of the state. Interestingly, about the Northeast, a couple of things. First of all, safety is your top priority. Not surprising, that's what we see across the state. But what you see after that is 14% of you identified preservation as a top priority. And then it's this very equal, and I mean equal, percentage on economic development, multimodal choices, and congestion. We have not seen that in any other part of the state, sort of this balanced view of priorities. And I ask you to take that into consideration as you talk about your project priorities. Okay, so more specifically, and I really love this interconnectedness of this comment. What we've seen across the board are a connection between highway safety on highways and local roads for cyclists and pedestrians. So a good broad view of the need to think about local, state, cyclists, pedestrians. In terms of pavement condition, I appreciate this comment. There's a recognition of the serious deterioration on our interstates and highways and streets and the increasing problem that it represents. Now, I'm glad to tell you, as Governor Kelly mentioned, we're closing the bank of KDOT, which means we are actually getting much more preservation work out onto the streets and highways. But that doesn't happen overnight. You don't just turn around a $300 billion system overnight. So we're working on it. It's going to get better, but we want to continue to hear both your thoughts, and we appreciate your support to make sure that bank closes and stays closed. Now, on the public transportation and active transportation, so meaning transit, bike, and ped, here's what I notice about here are the connections to the economy that came through in your comments. More focus on alternatives would attract a better workforce and employers. And I think we're all aware of the shortages of labor across the state. We also see a comment and a shout out, public transit is an extremely valuable service to our community. Service employees were able to stay employed and businesses stayed open through COVID because of our transit systems. So those are the sorts of things I ask you to keep in mind. We will not be able to have a transit or an alternative mode conversation today. We wanted to do that if we could have been in person, but we recognize at KDOT the importance of other modes, and I want to assure you that we continue to focus on those. Okay, as Governor Kelly said, more than 2,000 Kansans had input into developing the Ike program, and we're back with you today for your continued input. Now, a quick view of Ike. It represents a $9.9 billion investment over the next 10 years to strengthen infrastructure and provide more economic growth opportunities. Now, the way the Ike program is put together, about $5 billion is targeted for preservation of the system. As I mentioned, that highway system is worth more than $30 billion. It's one of the state's most valuable assets. Today, we're here to talk about this $2.3 billion that's targeted for modernization and expansion projects. In terms of the Northeast District, I want to talk about these minimum investments for modernization and expansion. We have targeted a minimum of $500 million to be delivered for the Northeast. Now, if you look down that column, what you see is that we've identified a minimum guarantee for each district totaling $1.1 billion. But I just said that we are going to put $2.3 billion into modernization and expansion. That difference represents good flexibility. So we can identify projects across the 10-year span of IKE to put into development and to get out to construction to address the needs that communities face on an ongoing basis. We also have identified the preservation spend, and we total it up for you there. In terms of the Northeast, we have already committed to construction, as Governor Kelly said, this summer. We identified about $750 million worth of work going to construction. For the Northeast alone, we have identified $550 million for construction. That already meets your minimum. We've identified 6 projects at $354 million to go into development, totaling about $900 million. That's why that flexibility between the $1.1 billion and the $2.3 billion is so important, and why we need to hear from you today and every 2 years about the importance of these projects, and we need your help to make sure the Bank of KDOT stays closed. All right, so let's talk a bit about these pipelines. There's the development pipeline, which is where we put projects to look at engineering, right-of-way, clear environmental sorts of work. And then as money is available, every 2 years, we pull those out for construction based on the revenues we have available. That way, we're able to meter projects based on our budget and backfill every 2 years into the development pipeline. So it was in May last year, the IKE passed in April, and by May, less than 8 weeks later, we were able to identify $1.6 billion worth of development work going into the pipeline. Now, as I said, we took $750 million out to move to construction. That means we have about $825 million worth of work currently in the pipeline, and we need to add $600 to $750 million back into the pipeline so that we have a thick, robust pipeline from which to choose projects. So specifically, how do we replenish the development pipeline? Well, you always go back to your principles. First, in partnership. I'm pleased under the IKE legislation, we're required to come out and have local consult every 2 years. We are going to bring you more options, new projects, more scopes for discussion today and on an ongoing basis. We've got updated information so that we can solve problems better. I look forward to the discussions we have today. All right, now it wouldn't be a KDOT meeting if you didn't have lots of good information. So I know you have a wealth of documents that were provided in advance. The 3 that I ask you to pay particular attention to are those that are outlined in red. Those are the project lists. In this case, in District 1, the Northeast, we have 3 lists. We have an urban and a rural expansion list, as well as a modernization list that covers the entire district. We'll be back out in 2 weeks on Thursday, September 30th, to talk in the urban area, but everybody's invited to all of the meetings. Now I'm going to talk a bit about what remains the same from 2019. We're going to review 2019 processes and what's carried over into 21, and then we'll talk about what's new, what we're bringing to you in a dynamic way for 2021. So first of all, we have the same scoring process. We have the same project types, the same factors and overall weights. Just like in 19, just like we did in T-Works, we're going to bring draft engineering and economic scores to you for discussion. And then we're going to listen and assess your input to inform that regional priority score. Now, when you think about scoring, what's important to understand is that we use scoring so that we can compare projects fairly to each other. We use the same process for all the projects. So that way, in a comparative sense, we get a handle on which are relatively scoring higher and lower. But we also recognize no process is perfect. We aren't going to get an absolute or an exactly precise answer. That's why we come to talk with you. Our process reflects our recognition of both pieces, the relativeness, as well as the interest of improving our process, and we will rely on your input to inform decisions. So I said the same project types, factors, and overall weights. Preservation, the bulk of the spend of our program. Things like overlays and reconstruction, bridge repair. We select those projects 100% based on engineering data. On the modernization side, that's where we add shoulders and flatten hills and straighten curves. We make improvements to what's already there. We use 80% of the score is based on engineering data and 20% on local input. Now on the expansion side, where we're adding lanes, adding interchanges, adding passing lanes, adding something to the system, we look at 50% of the score from an engineering perspective, 25% on local input, and 25% on economic analysis. And I'd be quick to point out, in this case, we do not compare urban and rural projects on an economic score. That simply wouldn't be fair. Okay, let's talk a bit about modernization and how we score that. We look at the engineering factors, again, that's 80%, based on geometrics. So things like hills and curves and sight distance, safety, capacity, and the pavement itself. We look at other factors like route continuity and previous investment. We don't take a single view of, say, a 5-mile segment of highway without thinking about what's on either side of that segment, as well as what have we invested in previously. It is important that we take a systematic view, a systems view of each segment of the highway. So that's why we take other issues into consideration. Now on the expansion side, remember this is where we're adding new things. We look at current and future congestion, truck traffic, as well as safety. We continue to look at gross regional product, and this time, and I'll talk in just a minute, we are also looking at traveler benefit. And of course, we look at other factors like route continuity and previous investment. All right, so as I've mentioned, we made some modifications coming into 21. We both are looking at safety as well as some other pieces with a more sensitive analysis, a more granular analysis. So first on the crash rate and crash frequency, previously we just looked at the rate. Now we're looking at the frequency so that we don't, if you were, for example, to have a really major crash on a segment of road with a lot of damage, that might overwhelm the score. Now we're taking that into consideration along with, say you have lots of small accidents and that doesn't get picked up. So now we're looking at both severity as well as frequency. We are also looking at the threshold for expansion projects on the engineering side. So if you think about it, as we start to add improvements to the system and you see congestion rates go down, essentially you start to see that scores, we're raising, if you will, we are raising the curve is, I guess, the best way to say that. So you don't want all your projects to be scoring absolutely perfectly. There's no way to then discern the differences between the projects. So we've essentially raised the curve on projects. It's harder to get a perfect score now than it used to be. And we'll continue to refine that analysis. And I'd be quick to point out that this discernment, this improved sensitivity, was based on input that we received in 2019. We've also refined our economic scoring. So let's take a step back to 2009 under T-Works. First time we used economic impact analysis. That was just as we were coming out of the Great Recession. And the thing that Kansas needed most at that time, we needed jobs. So when we did our economic analysis, we were very intentional about taking a look at job growth potential through these investments. Now, in 2019, heading into 2019, jobs were not as much an issue as trying to make sure that we stabilize our population and that Kansas becomes a great place to work and live and raise a family. So we started taking a look at impact to traveler personal time. So we've got the gross regional product and travel time benefits divided by cost plus that same factor. Now in 21, as we take a look at potential inflation, as we know we want to stretch our dollars as far as possible under Ike, we are taking that calculation, gross regional product, plus impact to traveler time, and dividing the whole calculation by cost. Therefore, in this analysis, cost becomes a larger component. Okay, so now as we look at the 2021 list for the Northeast District, And you see that some scores have been refined. It's based on this updated information. First, you can see there the updated data. This is the latest we have for traffic, crashes, and pavement condition. Now, we had some time after we announced projects last year to get people out into the field to do field verification so we could really see what's going on in the field. And as a result of that, we took a look at the passing lanes and we were able to identify places where we might be able to more advantageously place passing lanes, or where they might just really not be as feasible. Or in some cases, we said, hey, let's give it a beat and see what the impact other improvements might have on the need for passing lanes. We have better information on scopes and more refined cost estimates. A good example is US 75 in Osage County. When we got out there, we realized that passing lanes really weren't a good fit there. So the new scope is for 4-lane. We've also talked a bit about the scoring methodology that reflects input that we received. And we have some new projects to share with you. All right, so if you have your local consult project list in front of you, this is the time where I say it's time to show our math. So if you think about the list you saw in 2019, what we have done by moving projects to construction or into development, some of those projects have moved on out and they're no longer on the project list. We have the remaining projects from 2019 available to talk about today, and we have some new projects and new scopes. And then we have some projects that we didn't score, and I'll talk more about those in just a minute. But even though we didn't score them, it doesn't mean they're gone. We absolutely want to hear from you if we need to score those projects, or if you think a different sort of scope for those projects would actually work better for your region. So let's start with the easiest part first. So here's a list of projects that have moved from the Northeast from 2019. They're either in the development pipeline or they've already moved on to construction. And Maggie, a shout out for you because they've got the orange banner, which I think is absolutely appropriate for showing that these projects have moved on. You're welcome to talk about them. I don't think there's a lot of benefit in spending your precious time in your Zoom room talking about them, but you're welcome to if you want. Now, for buckets 2 and 3, previous and new projects, there's a total of 27 projects to talk about today. Of that, 10 of these are new projects and they are identified, they're in italics. And it's important to note that these projects have both come from communities as well as from district staff. And now let's talk for just a moment about about projects that were not scored this year. And you can see in red the reasons why. So for example, US 75 in Brown and Jackson County, as we took a hard look at those scopes, we decided we could get to those projects faster and sort of in a more direct line through our Strategic Highway Safety Initiatives program. So those projects are being done. We just didn't count them in the other list because they're not modernization or expansion projects. They've been recategorized and they're moving forward. There's a project, K4 in Jefferson County, you'll see that, that says Kansas River portion, number 130 needs to be programmed first. In other words, we've had time to take a step back and see when it makes the most sense to schedule projects. And we know we need to get to 130 before we get to these two. Let us know how important you think these two projects may or may not be. And then there's another project on here. It's the I-70 to K10 outer loop in Leavenworth County area. And so that is a 7-mile project. And I think the cost of it was it's estimated at $420 million. We want to hear about that project, but we didn't score it this time because we need to know how important it is to you and to the long-term growth of the area and for the region. But it is not likely, given that we've already got so much work going in the Northeast, it would be unlikely that it would make it forward in this particular round. But we want to hear from you. None of these are gone from our radar. It would absolutely make sense to take a look at it maybe later in this program or maybe for the future program. I want to be really honest and forthright with everybody. I was at a conference a couple of years ago and PennDOT, Pennsylvania DOT, got up and they talked about some aspects of their rolling program. And there's a lesson to be learned from what they said. They said one of the lessons they had learned was that money matters. And I thought, well, yeah, it does. It for sure does. They had a rolling program for about 20 years and they only added projects to their list. over and over and over again. And their lists were enormous. And then at some point they had to take a step back. And it was a painful process for the entire state to whittle through those. So we are going to bring you new projects. If we think some projects are too large, we want your thoughts in how we might be able to phase the projects. So it's in true transparency, we come to you in partnership. And it's not that these projects are gone, it's just that we didn't necessarily score all of them. All right, so when you take a total look at the District 1 list, you see that 11 projects moved into development or construction. We added 10 projects. We didn't score 10 projects. 3 projects have refined or changed scopes. And we have 1 project with an updated cost estimate. So there's lots for you to dive in there. This is probably my favorite slide in the whole deck. Scoring doesn't equal programming. And by that, I mean, even if your project scores a perfect 100, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a slam dunk, nor if your project scores sort of in the middle of the pack, doesn't mean it's outside of being selected. And here's why. You score so you understand how the projects sort of relate to each other. You program based on a whole host of reasons. Again, money matters, geography matters, lots of things matter. So we have to take a step back and say, so say you have one project, it's the perfect project, and it costs $10, and you have $10 to spend. Or you have projects 2, 3, and 4, and they each cost about 3.3 million. Maybe those next 3 projects are better than the highest perfect scoring project. And those are the kinds of things we have to take into consideration because we're trying to build a team of projects, not just pick the best one. It's kind of like the NFL and having a salary cap. All right. So with that, well, you know, we had done so well on the technology till we got to this part. Okay, there we go. All right, we got it to move there. All right, so today we are going to put you into Zoom rooms. And what we're going to ask you to talk about is think about what's new or what's changed in your region. Last week, we heard about a hospital that they closed. And so traffic in terms of a medical sense had been rerouted and had changed. We've heard about new businesses and new truck traffic. So let's hear about what's changing in the Northeast. We also want you to take a look at those survey results. We want to hear about the new projects, the projects that haven't been scored. We're looking for a robust conversation. I know it's not ideal. Nothing about COVID's been ideal, but please, we need to hear your thoughts. This is the process that we have in front of us. And identify your project priorities for the development pipeline in terms of what's high and what's medium. So with that, just hang on for a minute. We'll get you into your Zoom rooms. If you have trouble with technology, totally understand that. Put something in the chat feature and we'll be sure to help you get into a Zoom room. I want to tell you how pleased I've been. We've got 134 folks on the call right now. In each one of these meetings, people have hung on for the report backs because that is the guts of what we're doing. And I invite you to please stay on through until we get to the final end and we hear the report outs. Okay, given that it's 2 o'clock, we're going to have a 30-minute conversation, a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at 2:35. All right, with that, Lisa, take it away and get us into our rooms. Thank you. All right, and welcome back. Let's go on to a slide that we will share progress, and then we'll talk about some new initiatives. So a shout out to the KDOT team. Thank you so much, along with our partners in the engineering industry and our contractor partners as well. So despite COVID, I am pleased to say that we have launched every single new program under IKE in 2020. So from cost share that we stood up in 92 working days, to the innovative tech program, to the reinstated local bridge program, and including even a driver's education program to try to improve safety on our highways. All of these new programs were launched in 2020. Now I want to take just a minute, as I talked about at the opening, the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So while that's being discussed in Congress, we can also see contours of some new priorities at the federal level. And I really think it's our challenge and our opportunity here in Kansas to think about how can we address long-term infrastructure priorities find ways to create growth in Kansas and seek additional federal funds. And really, we're looking for that sweet spot to be able to deliver improvements in long-term economic opportunities. So to that end, I'd like to share a couple of things with you. First, certainly there's a lot of conversation at the national level about racial equality, and that is important. I also talk about, when I'm in national meetings, I talk about the importance of rural equity. When you look at rural outcomes, things like education outcomes and health outcomes and economic outcomes, oftentimes those outcomes lag in rural areas. And I want to make sure that when we're talking about federal investments in infrastructure, that rural areas don't get left behind. So one thing we want to talk about, and when we submit applications for projects for federal funding, we want to make sure that we talk about equity and outcomes. And sometimes that's by painting a strong view of what rural equity means. We also need to be sensitive to conversations around greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in the United States, when you pair transportation along with ag, what you see is about a 38% of greenhouse emissions come from those two sectors. When you look more specifically at Kansas, you see that about 53% of greenhouse emissions come from transportation and ag. So we've got to find some ways to talk about our projects and what benefits can be derived in terms of emission control through some of the work that we were doing in Kansas. So I'm pleased to talk for just a moment about home, heartland opportunities, markets, and environment. We've got two pilot projects going on now in Kansas. We've done outreach along two corridors where we're running some broadband, some fiber as part of the Preservation Plus program. What this is intended to do in coordination and cooperation in partnership with the Department of Ag, as we lay some of that fiber, we're now talking with farmers on either side to see if they are interested in participating in a pilot program to take a look at carbon trading. You have to have good broadband connection in order to do the data analytics to prove carbon sequestration. So as we run our fiber, it's just a practical next step to try to get that fiber out to some farmers so that they can participate in this pilot program. It helps improve soil health, and it also is good for water conservation. We also know that there's an increasing importance or an increasing emphasis on electric vehicles as a way to control greenhouse gas emissions. We've already seen the private sector's response. You might recall during the Super Bowl, a big commercial around passenger trucks that will be available that are EV charged. Now, with every upside, sometimes there's a downside. And one thing that we need to recognize is the impact that electric charged vehicles will have to revenues that are generated for transportation. Now, this was, to be honest, I took a hard look at these numbers when these came through. So in 21, roughly 41% of our revenues, or the money that funds transportation, comes from motor fuels, gas tax. And you can see that in the blue and the gray there, state and federal. 2045 is not that far away. When you take a look at that, gas tax will likely account for about 25% of the funds that are available for transportation. And in Kansas, up to 60% may rely on sales tax. That's a concern to me. That's a hefty percentage of our budget that might be coming from sales tax. And quite frankly, I'm just not so sure how sustainable that is. So we need to be thinking about alternative ways to generate revenue. One possible approach that's being discussed on both coasts is to move to a road usage charge approach. So you move from a gas tax, paying for the fuel you use, a surcharge on the fuel you use, to the amount of road that you use. From my perspective, that's a pretty rational approach. However, the Midwest has not been a part of those conversations. As I said, both coasts have been actively studying this kind of approach. It's time for Kansas to have a voice at the table. I'm pleased to let you know that we received a US DOT grant to fund a study of how a road usage charge approach might work in the Midwest. Particular to our grant application, we said we wanted to engage with rural communities, the ag industry, and commercial trucking. I want to be super clear, super clear. This is an opt-in volunteer if you want to be a part of the study, a part of the conversation. There is no intention to track people, track and tax. No, it's not that. It's a voluntary study so that we can better understand the usage patterns in a rural state, in an ag state, so that we can have a good, strong voice at the table. This is how the study will work. First, phase one, lots of outreach, conversations with people, a statewide survey, focus groups, workshops that allow us to move into the second phase, which is design. A lot of states have just put a pilot together and run with it. We're going to have conversations first to put our pilot together. The pilot will give lots of options. Do you want to record your mileage with an old-fashioned paper and pen? Do you want to use an app on your phone? Do you want to have some technology in terms of like a dongle that would be in your car? Entirely up to you if you even want to participate at all. We've had good reception from various chambers of commerce. Some contractors are interested in better understanding their fleet usage. So we look forward to engaging with folks if you want to be a part of the pilot, part of the study that then happens in phase three, which will conclude in March of 24. If you're interested in participating, you'll see Joel's contact info on the screen here. We'll be reaching out in the coming month to ask for volunteers to see if you want to participate. If you don't, that's fine. If you are interested, we encourage your participation so we can have a strong voice as these sorts of issues are discussed at the national level. Also, I'm pleased to announce Charge Up Kansas. So in terms of electric vehicle charging stations, we need more in Kansas. Just to be blunt, we have about $2 million. KDOT was recently tasked with administering $2 million in the Volkswagen Settlement Fund to make available statewide. We're seeking partnerships now with utilities and vendors and municipal partners, and a request for information is currently on the street. We encourage you to take a look at it and help us charge up Kansas. And lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about Home Field Advantage coming on October 15th, sponsored by KDOT, the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and 10 MASTO states. So those are the 10 interior states of the US, the heartland states, like Iowa and Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota and Missouri and Kansas. We're banding together to talk about what happens at the intersection of transportation, ag, and technology. We'll be bringing together public and private sector leaders in a conversation about how can we drive down the cost of transporting ag products, expand economic opportunities, diversify crops, and improve soil health. Now, this first conversation will be virtual on October 15th. It will lead to us identifying pilot project kinds of ideas, and we'll get together in a workshop sort of format, probably in February, to pencil those out. There is always more strength when we work together regionally. And I look forward to working with the other 9 states to identify some opportunities to bring more funds back to the heartland. So with that, I'd like to put in one more pitch. If you have friends or colleagues who are not able to participate today, they are absolutely invited to go out to this link and be able to watch today's episode of Local Consult and weigh in with their thoughts. Or if you want to go back and take a look at this in the coming weeks, it's available on demand, and I invite you to take a look at it. Now it's time for the guts of the meeting, which is to hear our feedback session.
Yep.
All right.
I'm ready here. Let me share the screen. Give me one second.
Okay, Lisa. Also, I'm pleased to note we have 121 folks still on the call. Thank you, everyone who's still here. Thanks for hanging in. This is a chance for all of us to hear from each other, and I appreciate you staying on. I'll make note as Lisa starts to share her screen, a couple of things that we've heard. So Lisa was able to place me in the breakout group, so I was able to listen in on conversations. Certainly we've heard the sorts of things that I was able to hear in terms of snippets. The Edgerton intermodal facility is growing by leaps and bounds. We're seeing increasing traffic on K10. Walmart distribution center south of Topeka is bringing in 400 jobs. A note of clarification on project 159. It represents a new alignment and bridge. So with that, let's go to the urban expansion projects. And at quick glance, you see K4, Shawnee County, and it has a lot of stars on it. So Jessica, James, if you would share first what your group had to say about this.
Sorry, Madam Secretary, I was having some audio issues. Can you say the project number again, please?
130.
130, yes, ma'am. So we had a lot of concerns in our group around the low safety score of that project. As you can see in the engineering factors, that Harvey ball is empty. And two people in the group said that maybe this is because there are numerous near miss accidents in this stretch of roadway. But we're definitely concerned about the safety score of that project and thought that this was important to their region.
Okay, we will take another look at that. Thank you. That's one of the purposes of local consult is to hear about where people have questions or concerns about about specific scores. Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to 130? Any other
Secretary,
facilitators?
it's Mike Moriarty.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, we had a quick comment in our session about Project 130. Recognizing the cost associated with the 4-lane expansion, along with the safety issues, the growing traffic, things like that. Members of the group had wondered if consideration could be given to a reduced scope package, so something like a passing lane solution to get those improvements constructed sooner.
Thank you, Mike. That is absolutely another benefit of local consult is this idea of looking at scopes and modifying scopes to get projects done sooner in partnership. Thank you very much. Anyone else on 130?
Secretary, this is Rachel.
Yes, Rachel.
I think Pete was in our group when this was mentioned, but there were some ideas about phasing that project. So along with what Mike is saying.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And also I want to say thank you to the participants for raising both concerns and just as importantly, options for consideration. Thank you. All right. Also, I would note 114, the US 48 K10 Douglas County, the Lawrence to Johnson County line. I see some hefty responses there. Any facilitator want to talk about 114? Or it may relate to this increasing traffic on K10, but anything else?
Secretary, I would just add that the comment that we had was from Eudora. And even though that segment is in Lawrence and a little bit away from Eudora, they are still strongly advocating for that to be a high priority given the impact to the region. So we did have some regional advocacy for that project.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. And I think Corey, you were getting ready to say something as well.
Yes, thank you, Secretary. The main comment in our group was related to the workforce and how this piece of infrastructure moves our workforce at a time where that's such a vital component of transportation. So that was one.
Okay, thank you, Corey. I think that's similar to, I suspect that aligns with Eudora's comments that Lindsay provided. All right. What about 122? It also has 3 stars and 2 arrows. The stars represent top priority. The arrows represent medium priority. Let's talk about 4th Street to California. Jessica Hutton, maybe?
Sure. Thanks, Madam Secretary. Our group talked about this one being a high priority in the capital city area because it really promotes connectivity in the region. It's also a major truck traffic route for trucks going through the city and coming into the city, and making sure that there's enough capacity is also something that will help safety moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. And before we leave the urban expansion projects, I think let's take a look at that 823, the K10 Johnson County, K7 to 435. I recognize that we've already had some conversation around the one leg of K10. Does anyone want to speak to this other leg of K10? Okay. All right. If not, let's go on to the next set of projects. Rural expansion. Okay. Wow. Okay. So let's take a look at the US 24 Pottawatomie County. It's in italics, so that represents a new project. But it looks to me like there was a lot of conversation around it. Anyone want to speak to 165? Michelle Needham, let's start with you.
Yes, Madam Secretary. We had folks from Pottawatomie bring up the fact that this interchange is near a high school and middle school. So there's increased student traffic, which becomes a safety concern.
Okay. Rachel, conversation from your group.
We felt like this project was a medium priority, but one of the things that was great, and it was the question that you asked about what has changed in your region. A new project was brought up also on US 24, so we have the details of that in Drew's notes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I appreciate that. That is exactly another purpose. Jessica Hutton, do you have comments?
Sure. I'll just echo what Michelle said about the high school, and it was a middle school or elementary school, but definitely two schools very close in the area, a lot of school bus traffic, having to make turns and go across high-speed highway traffic that was a safety concern in our group.
Okay. Was there much conversation around either the urban or the rural expansion list and projects that were not scored this year? Was there any
one more comment on 165, and then I
Sure.
wanted one other piece to what you just asked, Secretary. On 165, I think a unique perspective that I had in my group is that we have made some recent improvements at that location, but with the safety issues that are going on, it is their perspective that in order to really solve the problem, the interchange is needed. So they don't really see other interim improvements that could make much of a difference.
Okay.
And then I wanted to just speak to, I think we had a number of members of Michelle Miles's family here with us today, and they were really talking about K92. So it wasn't a specific project that was not included on the list, but they lost a dear family member to them on that stretch of road. They are really looking to KDOT to study that intersection near Ozaki on K92 where this incident took place and see if there's a need to adjust the speed limit or look at other safety improvements that could be made on that stretch. I just want to express appreciation to them for coming and speaking up about that particular location and assured them that we would be looking into that. So that's the only project that was discussed in my group that isn't already being discussed with KDOT that I assured them we'd look into.
Okay. Lindsay, thank you for bringing that forward. And first I want to say a sincere, it is heartfelt. I read every single fatality report and there are way too many fatalities in Kansas and I'm so sorry for your loss. And we will obviously take a look at that section. I appreciate you bringing it forward. And that's why we are working hard under the strategic safety improvements and trying to get money into projects that maybe, sometimes really these shoulder projects are so important and we know that we've got lots of work to do around the state. And I appreciate you bringing your concerns forward. Thank you. Okay,
This is Leroy here. I just jump in here, say that we have been with that family, and I'm quite certain that our Metro engineer Ryan has already been in contact with our traffic engineering folks and has requested an analysis of not only intersection but a segment of that roadway.
thank you, Leroy. Thank you, and to your team, Leroy. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the modernization projects. All right, so I like what I'm seeing here. We've got a lot of stars and some arrows. So let's start with 158, the US 56 Douglas County project. And let's see, and Emma, let's hear what you've got to say about this project. I think your group was pretty lively around this one. Emma, I don't know if you're having audio problems. Anyone else want to talk about 158?
Secretary, this is Greg. We definitely discussed the safety portion of this, that there's a lot of steep drop-offs and steep shoulders. And so that was a key factor in selecting this project.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to 158? 153, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Secretary, this is Jenny Kramer, we did discuss this briefly in our group and did rate it as a top priority simply because it provides a connection and has a crash history.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Thank you. How about the K99 in Wabunsee County or the 159 in Pottawatomie County?
Madam Secretary, this is Jessica James. Our group spoke about Project 151 there in Wabunsee County. And as noted on the sheet here, route continuity was important, but they also talked about the volume of truck traffic in the area because there's a John Deere facility there.
Okay.
And so that was important to their region.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Thank you. I see there was some. Oh, Nathan, you might want to mute yourself, please. There was a lot of feedback there. I do see, although okay, although we held this meeting, I think originally was going to be in Topeka. I see that there is some emphasis on the I-35 projects in Johnson County. Does anybody want to speak to those? I think this is a good sign of regionalism when you see projects sort of outside getting some stars. Any conversation around these projects?
Madam Secretary, this is Jessica Hutton. Our group talked a little bit about 852 and 865, just as having a lot of new truck traffic in the area and wanting to make sure that those trucks are accommodated in a way that also help passenger cars, because it can be a little bit scary for passenger cars to be interacting with all those trucks in that area.
Thank you. Right, Jessica, thank you.
And Madam Secretary, this is Danny. On 150, I'm sorry, on 178, you're right. It was a good example of regionalism in that they saw this as a good complement to the Gateway project and sort of an extension of that. There's still some issues at that direction, so really trying to figure out how to work them all together so they work in concert.
Gotcha. Thanks, Danny. Okay, let's go back to 159. Let's see, which one is that, Maggie?
That's Pottawatomie County.
Oh, the Pottawatomie County. Okay. Mike Moriarty, maybe?
Yeah, Secretary. So we had a nice conversation about Project 159, also known as the Marlatt Extension. I don't know what it's currently called, if there's a local name for it, but I've been around that project for quite some time, and I've always referred to it as the Marlatt Extension. During the conversation, we kind of linked projects 159 and 165 kind of into a single project because they're both so closely related. In the original study, the US 24 corridor plan, one of the locations for an interchange to exit 24 onto Marlatt was at Flush Road. It was a good point to have the interchange, but it also addressed some of the safety concerns that have been talked about at that location. So over the years, there's been a lot of conversations about the need for this corridor, in particular to support MBAF, growth associated with the animal health corridor, the commuter traffic, and the North Campus growth over at K-State. There's been kind of a new conversation surrounding Fort Riley and the fact that Fort officials would like housing and development to occur further away from the fort. And this emerging policy seems to increase the need for the Marlatt extension to not only provide access to properties, right, for housing growth, but also to provide safe, reliable, rapid travel corridor for soldiers back to Fort Riley in the event of some kind of an emergency. So bottom line, what we heard in our group, the corridor does support regional growth, economic benefit, national defense, and provides an alternate corridor for people and freight during flooding events or traffic incidents along Highway 24. Those were some of the key points that we discussed.
Hey, Mike, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. That's part of what we're here to do today, is to understand if policies change, or sort of, as I talked about economic analysis, a shift from a focus on jobs to really a shift on people and workers. And so, and there may be another shift in another 2, 4, 8 years. So that's why we want to connect with communities. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I'd also like to give a shout out. Mike usually serves as our MC, and he does a fantastic job of keeping us moving along with a smile on his face. So Mike, I'm sorry you didn't get the stage this year. I sincerely hope we are all back in person. I would expect we would be 2 years from now, and I promise you'll get the stage right back. All right. Any other comments around these projects? This has been a rich conversation. As I said, we'll have another round in 2 weeks from today related to the Northeast. Any other comments from facilitators? This has been very helpful.
Just Secretary, one more thing from our group.
Sure.
Map ID 151, anything that can be done on K99 to support or to alleviate the supersized loads, or to, I don't know, somehow I think it would affect Wamego, and also would be in the interest of Manhattan. Plus it could reduce the length of travel that these vehicles have to travel with their oversized, overweight loads.
Thank you. Yes, Jenny, I appreciate that comment. We struggle, quite frankly, with oversized, overweight loads in many locations in the state, and I appreciate you raising the concern around that location. Thank you. All right, with that, let's go on to the next slide. I'm also looking at participant numbers. Thank you all for hanging in here. Excellent turnout today from the Northeast. As we talked about, we've already talked a bit about, go to this slide. A reminder, please, you'll get a post survey. Short, very short, a couple of questions that'll help us do better next time. Next slide. And in terms of next steps, later this year, there will be an announcement building upon all the input we've received today and from the 7 other meetings about the projects that we are putting into the development pipeline. And sincerely, you speak, Kansans speak, KDOT listens, and together, there's no doubt we work together. Thank you so much. Be safe today. Be safe driving. And I look forward to announcing some projects later this year. Thank you all. Bye-bye.